All right, the music is down, so I think that means we're starting.
All right.
Very nice. Thank you for being here.
Sure, Fredrik. Great to be here.
Have you been at every single OpenStack summit?
Just about. Think San Diego was probably the first one I was at.
All right.
It was very nascent. You know, I was very idealistic about thinking what I wanted to accomplish with, like, you know, OpenStack and infrastructure as a service. And I think at that time I had we were a VMware shop, so I was looking at like things that could give me elasticity in the data center.
Let's talk about if you're still that enthusiastic later on, and we'll figure that one out. What's the first version of OpenStack you used in production?
First in production, it was a job after that. So I moved to a company called Lithium Technologies. And
some people have heard of that, I think.
Yeah, it was a software as a service, and we actually probably highlighted a lot of stuff we did there. And we started at the Havana release, and at that time we also had to go through a little bit of a transition of what we were trying to do. I think we were, as like many operators, were looking for, like, is there like a distribution that could help us to install? And we hadn't fully embraced CI/CD into a lot of our tool chains yet. Mm-hmm. So we were like trying to like find partners. At that time we had Cloud Scaling help us get going. Obviously Cloud Scaling got merged into EMC, and we had all this fun with open source licensing that kept us from our product. But that was when we first really started having our first initial workloads in production.
Got it. And then you went to TubeMogul.
Yes, I did. So did a run at Lithium for about 3 years. Decided to see, like, hey, you know, this has been a good run. Let me take a little bit of a sabbatical and kind of see what that's like. And I realized about a month into it that, you know, I better have a bone to chew on when I retire, because I was already, antsy to kind of get into my next journey. And at that time, I spent some time in Europe with TCP Cloud, as they were good colleagues in the community. And that's the great thing about open source, is you make a lot of these connections. People help you to be able to solve problems. They have experience running clouds as well. And they actually had a really interesting platform where they were trying to, really use Kubernetes as the control plane orchestration for OpenStack. So spent a couple months with them.
That was very early on to use
It was
Kubernetes
very early on. You could see
together.
our hacky thing we did at the OpenStack Prog Day. And that was really our first attempt to try to see, could we run it that way? And just talking earlier about someone saying, hey, I just spun up a containerized control plane using Ansible, and I'm thinking, man, that's really smart, because we did it the hard way.
Now, I don't want to belabor that, but were you able to make it?
That piece to work, I mean, I guess I would say in a dev stacky way it worked. Like it worked there, but then you try to scale it up, and then you're like, oh, here's yet another set of new challenges. But we're seeing all these projects now emerge, and like a lot of those patterns that came from a lot of those learnings. These are things that were iterations that needed to happen, so that now we can get a lot of the flexibility that containers provide on the control plane, and being able to orchestrate. We know as operators, like, upgrades have always been that challenge, and now we're seeing all these approaches like fast forward upgrades, which I think is great, as well as, like, the speed and agility of what containers can provide you, as well as, like, blue-green deploys, rollbacks, all these great things that it offers. So, yes, we definitely have to fall on our face a little bit and scrape our knees, but it's all in the pursuit of, like, having a real stable, resilient stack.
Yeah, for sure. You didn't have those things when you went to TubeMogul, and TubeMogul went to Adobe. That was still a time where it was very hard to stand up an OpenStack cloud. Yeah,
well, the thing is, look, they had really been on this journey since 2015. So I think, yesterday there was a tweet sent out, by my boss, and he basically, really kind of rolled back some of our history in 2015 when they hit their first production release. And the meta that I came to was where they were already at when I got there. So
what did that look like?
So a lot of it, for me, what I thought was great is when I got there is that they had really jumped in and were like, instead of taking things from a distribution approach, they were really looking at, like, can we pull from upstream repos? Can we start building from source? And that was great, because then the team became very, they understood the stack. They knew when things were breaking or how to scale, and, was it elaborate or was it like a public cloud? It wasn't. But what it did was that it was moving at the speed of our business. It was able to deliver a solution, because that's one of the hard challenges when you build platforms is, what are you building for? You have to really question, like, time to market. And for us in our business, we're in this, this advertising space, and they stayed very honed in on their requirements versus, like, trying to feature match AWS, because we're not a public cloud. We're trying to meet what our workloads need. And so that's what they were doing. And it, yes, was there some areas where it could have been improved? there was definitely areas of improvement. Now we're looking back and doing a lot of retrospective of, how can we improve the performance, the availability, and recovery.
Sure. But when you got there, they already had their little OpenStack cloud at that point. They were still experimenting though at that point, right? They weren't really running production workloads.
They were running production when I got there. They had, the year before, they had actually had production workloads running. And really, I guess you could kind of say I came in and I just, caffeinated the project and helped things really scale up more, because that was our race to really meet our business needs. Once that stack was really stable, the business felt like we could rely on this. And it was, we had a really replicatable model to go forward with other data centers as well, because that was the thing that the first few iterations, they really had to kind of figure out like how the stack was going to behave. And there was some compromises that were needed to be made. I mean, we wanted perfection, but we had to produce something.
What compromises did you have to make?
I think there was some ideals about how you I want to use this type of flavor of Linux, and yet it wasn't really friendly towards building up an OpenStack cloud. And so I think they got very pragmatic about even the services that were, or the projects that we're picking. And you roll back 3 years ago, think about all the projects in the ecosystem that were around, and you could easily get sucked into like, wow, that's solving this problem and that's solving that problem. But they stayed focused on compute, storage, and network, and those were the core things that we needed to deliver. And I think that very modest approach helped us to be able to be successful. And yes, there was a few bumps along the way as you're learning like how a cloud behaves. They all have their very interesting nuances to them. But the business was able to rely on it. They were able to say, this, we want to expand on this platform, and we're able to help us to kind of move forward so that we could expand even further.
What bumps did you run into? Was there ever a point where you said, maybe I made the wrong choice here? Maybe I should have gone with another?
I would say probably lithium. I probably had a lot of that, I mean, and that was because of just some of the complexities that we sometimes introduce. Like, I jump back to that one only because I was mentioning earlier, we had done like SDN as well as like OpenStack, and then we have like distributed systems running on top. And when developers would come to me, and here I thought in my career, I'd heard like every challenging problem there was, and then I have developers coming to me saying, well, something's slow, and I'm just like, geez, what do I start digging in at? Do I stop up here up top, or do I go down underneath to the underlay that could be affecting it? And as far as like my experience here at the Advertising Cloud, I mean, we've had a few challenges in regards to just some of the control plane, like scaling it accordingly. Sometimes it's trial and error. I can't say that we had, very, very fortunately not experienced really any major outages, but a lot of times those outages have helped us. Like we recently had an event where it was outside of us, and it was one of our data center providers. They had a storm and an event that just knocked out our data center completely. That
providers start with E and end with Quinix?
It sounds kind of like that,
yes.
Okay, yeah. And so it was a good experience, because I mean obviously you never want to like have something I mean I wish I could have this like and I love chaos engineering, and I love what it's really bringing, and I love having control over when you create chaos in your environments, but this was one that was outside of us. But our recovery was very impressive. I actually was very surprised that we were able to get back up in less than 30 minutes. We obviously have things on the edge outside of us that our content providers are able to shift traffic for us, which also alleviates some of the pressure that we have. But our business, they want that availability zone.
Sure.
And that recovery went very smooth. I mean, I was like, as soon as like MySQL came up, and I'm like, all right, I can kind of breathe easier. I know it's not going to be like a really utter disaster.
You're running MySQL?
Well, behind the scenes, there's some stuff behind the scenes, yes.
Put that into perspective, maybe. You've got over 100,000 cores now of OpenStack. How much data flows through your systems every second, probably at this point? Because it's the advertising cloud. You're running, you're doing arbitrage for advertising sales and bits and things like that. So it's a complex system, and it has to be pretty much real time.
It definitely has. Like I think I previously had talked about this at earlier summits, and we get transactionally like 300 billion requests per day. So it's a very latency is key. On top of that, we have some things that exist outside of OpenStack, like our edge right now is more bare metal as a service. We have HA proxy on the edge to deal with that. And then we have some other big data as well in that infrastructure as well. So it's very like everything is just critical, as far as like latency. So a lot of our decision making, it's very pragmatic. Like we had to think like, how could we shorten the path so that we can actually make sure the customer experience is there, that we meet the SLAs that we have set out. So that drives a lot of our decision making. Right now, we're actually really assessing now, like, okay, do we want the tax of an overlay networking on top of what we're doing? Like, what is there that's going to make us want to do that? So we have to really, every little decision like that architecturally, we have to really vet out to see, is it worth it? Does it give us something that we currently don't have? And what does this meet our requirements for our stakeholders?
Sure. Over time, has OpenStack gotten better at meeting those requirements for you, or what has happened over the years since you've been there?
I think definitely like newer operators that are coming into it, I'm like, you're in a great space. I mean, there's a lot of stability, and I think there was a lot of lessons learned that we had to go on this journey that a lot of us had to learn. I noticed just in seeing the community now, there's a lot of faces that I don't see, and I see a lot of new ones as well, and some who still are here, and maybe in a different company as well. But I think it's gotten definitely stable. There's a little bit less of the ecosystem of projects out there for newer operators. I would say hey, jump on in, it's great. I think for us as well, like we're seeing some of the stability as well. We for a while we're still on, probably like last year, and we're actually getting rid of the last of our ice house deployments, and we got to like Mitaka. We saw the benefits. We saw like 3 times performance. It was great. Obviously, there's hypervisor benefits under the hood. Sure. There's all these other parts of the projects that have gotten better and optimized. So for us, we were like, we need to keep this thing moving forward. That's really like the critical piece for us now. What
were some of those lessons you learned in that process? What mistakes did you make? What went really wrong?
What went really wrong? I would say the lesson that I think I'm really being challenged with right now is, so one of the things that Nico and myself outlined at the Sydney Summit was reaching 100,000 cores with a small team.
4 people.
4 people. I got 3 of them here with me right now. They're sitting in the audience. And
so if something goes down now,
one of them's going to be racing out of here.
Oh, yeah.
And I have somebody else who's on standby as well. But I think
so there's 5 people. You're lying.
Well, 1, 2, 3, 4. You count me 5. Yes. But really the challenge, and I think it's more current, is what I'm facing is, now we're hitting this new journey, and what I mean by that is like we're seeing like the rise of like with containers brought to us. We all saw the promise, and then it's like, okay, now I want to have everything become a container, and I want to like get all the benefits of that, because what people want is they want to get that speed of the idea out there, and so that promise of containers really provides that. And as an operator, I'm like, I loved it because it's like, great, I know exactly what you're shipping. This is a contract between me and a developer, and I can provide that. Well, that being said, when you start mixing in Kubernetes with OpenStack, I'm like, am I going to break my team? Because there's another level of complexity, and now all of a sudden we have an abstraction on top of an abstraction on top of another abstraction.
Right.
So how do I set my team up for success? So I feel like I'm having more of less of a technical challenge, but more of like a culture challenge of like, how do I usher in these changes and bring them along without just kind of like, risking, the performance and how we are currently doing things. So that's a tension that I think a lot of operators may face as well. Like, do I start with infrastructure as a service? Do I just jump over here? And then as well as like, how do I make all these things interoperate? Because we're mixing projects now. For me, it's like CNCF and OpenStack Foundation. It's like these cousins, and we want them to get along, and we want interoperability, and you want these communities to stay healthy. And so those are the things that make me worry a little bit.
We should talk about the community too at some point. But what are you doing right now? Are you using containers?
So we are starting on that that journey. So it's been a long ask, and I think because of like the size of our team, we have to really make decisions like, is it the right time? I think there's been a lot of like dialogue between my boss and I about like, how do we introduce these things, and making sure that we're always questioning, is it the right time for us to do these things? And I've made the mistake of, if you want to talk about like, is always being like the early adopter, like trying to jump in on board, and then realizing like, well, maybe I should have played this a little bit more conservative. So for us, we've got a few projects that will be kicking off here pretty soon. We're already running Kubernetes on OpenStack. We're not trying to do Kubernetes on bare metal just yet. but these are things that are in our roadmap that we need to R&D and decide like, all right, what makes sense for us.
Are you developers asking for that?
Yes, yeah. There's definitely a strong ask, and and the driver is just really people want to they want to iterate faster. They want to be able to continually deploy. So it's definitely been an ask, and it's just kind of like how do we kind of get there and provide that platform that's going to give it to them. And I think from Lithium, if you would have probably seen the Tokyo keynote, we were doing the same thing, like running Kubernetes on top of OpenStack, because it was the same thing. We wanted to speed up development. And the thing that I came away from there was just that as we started like going down this path, what I realized like we started solving were things that other people in the community solve. And what I mean is we started like thinking like, hey, we got to make sure that we provide the guardrails so that, okay, we're gonna like say, here, you have control of what's happening in this environment. But we want to make sure we know their standard logging, their standard monitorings, like all the things that my team depends on, so that if someone comes to them, they're like, this is our single source of truth. So I think those lessons were ones that we were kind of figuring out at that time. We were kind of in a sense trying to create a service mesh, and now we have a word for it,
Istio?
Istio is, yes, all these great things that are emerging, but we were seeing the same thing. So taking those lessons that I learned there, I've been really kind of trying to bring the same thing back to our developers and provide the same platforms. I'm encouraging like, make sure to think about like, let's not make kubectl our new SSH. Let's actually create a platform that's going to be given that ease of use, help them to go quickly. And if they want to get under the hood and get advanced, sure, that's there. But let's make sure that it's something that developers, it's easy for them to adopt, and then to get all that good additional things along with it.
Sure. You're talking a lot about developers want more speed. Does it mean OpenStack is not giving them that speed right now for developing?
I think there is projects there that are doing it, I need to spend maybe a little bit more time getting more involved in some of those projects. I always take now a little bit more modular approach design, only because of my past, where I don't want to couple myself into like if there's hey, we can do this OpenStack project that deploys your Kubernetes, thing like that.
Sure.
I tend to be like maybe I should just keep them separate, just to give myself a little room to kind of pivot if I need to, and decide like, hey, this may be a different direction for us, and let those projects kind of mature a bit. But it seems like there's a lot of operators here making great success with that. As far as like the speed of innovation with like OpenStack and stuff, I take that kind of two ways. Like one, I want this project to be boring. I just want it to be stable. That's why I always appreciate when there's a lot of strong voices in this community where it was just like, if anything, slow down some of these other things and let's focus on that core. Let's make sure those things, because you want that part to be rock solid.
Sure.
And so I think that is great. But now we're seeing all these open infrastructure movement. I think that's really, really positive. I love the promise of Kata containers. I've been tracking that really closely, and I'm like, hey, this actually may have a really benefit for us even outside of OpenStack, like putting it on our edge may be a great way to do it, as well as like internal to our stack. So, we can have that security, and then, we still have some of the speed as well of containers.
Right. Now we talked about containers and Kubernetes a lot. Adobe talks a lot about Azure and Microsoft and being on the public cloud.
Yeah.
How does that all play together?
I can't really. Adobe obviously has been very public about their broader, public cloud stuff. From a personal level, I would say, because believe me, I don't want to be in data centers. I'm thrust into it because of just our requirements. And as far as like public clouds, I've been an early adopter of AWS more than a decade. And what I love about what I'm seeing from Azure is, and if I had to say what the one differentiator I'm seeing is, obviously Amazon's way further ahead. They're just, it's a machine just churning out great features and services. And if you're willing to pay for it, hey, great. It's a great place to get started. But what I love about the Azure and what's happening there, it's the people. Like I definitely do have like a lot of good relationships with a lot of that group. I think, the Azure container team is doing some really amazing stuff and really thinking about the end user. So if I had to just make a personal bet, like where I'd love to see myself land at, I definitely see, I'd love to make that more part of my roadmap.
Okay.
I think we have some cloud native journey that needs to happen in regards to, as we go back, and we have apps that are very optimized for a virtual environment that, now we're assessing like, okay, maybe we need to go back and look at this and make it behave a little more friendly in a container environment so that we get some of that benefits.
Sure. Are you doing any cloud bursting right now? You've talked about that a little bit, but are you actually doing it? Have you experimented with it?
We did that last year kind of a bit, and I think it was mainly the driver of like, it's always tough to scale in a data center because you got to be very planned out. And when we were tube mogul, it was pretty easy because we're one site. We know who to go yank on and say, hey, we gotta expand. Here things have to be a little bit more planned out. So we did definitely leverage AWS for spinning up VMs. I think now I'm looking more towards containers, and I think everybody else as well is realizes that's probably where that type of strategy is going to land at.
Sure. Do you see a time where you're moving completely away from OpenStack?
Oh, tough question there, huh? I think
Are you locked in?
No, I don't think. Well, no, definitely not locked in. I know we could move our workloads wherever we decide to, and I think that's really what I'm trying to do is make sure that we have the best solution cloud-wise, whether it's public or private, and making sure that it meets our requirements as well as one of our drivers was the costs and economics was one sub-driver obviously. I definitely see ourselves, at least for the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to be there. I know a lot of the workloads we have, and there's a lot of benefits from it. And I'm definitely keeping a close eye on how the interoperability and the open infrastructure movement really goes, because that to me will really tell me where this community is headed. But I love the stability, and I think CNCF and a lot of the projects there, there's going to be a lot of maturity around it. Kubernetes is, I think its community is the real big driver and makes
sure.
You definitely see the benefits there. So for us, I definitely see kind of like a hybrid platform model, if you want to put it that way.
Sure, sure. What could the OpenStack community do for you? What are you looking for right now from OpenStack?
I mean, as far as I tend to look at it a little bit different, Fredrik. I kind of tend to be more of how can I help other operators learn from myself? But if I had to say, what I'm looking for is I love connecting with other operators as well. I love to hear a lot of their use cases. I want to see how they're succeeding because I don't know it all. I always tend to feel like I have to work twice as hard as everybody else just to stay ahead. And if anything, I always just look for other people in the community to I'd love to hear the use cases. Let me learn from you as well. And then as far as what they could do for me, I think it's I guess I think we had talked a little earlier about just the overall health of certain projects and things like that. And so those are the things I'm really tracking and trying to make sure that I'm also staying involved to make so that our the things that we'd love to see out of the platform, we're feeding back into it. And ideally we're heard and we can actually have a voice there as well. So I trying to participate more in getting involved with the user committee is one way that I've been able to get involved. And it's been great because the foundation has been really open to when I come forward with opportunities to participate, they've been really shepherding me and helping me in there as well. And I would strongly encourage other operators as well who are out there to get involved, make sure that your voice is being heard.
We talked earlier on a little bit about this, and you mentioned maybe the people who are coming in now are smart because they don't have to make your mistakes, right? But at this point, what do you see as the future of OpenStack? Do you feel, last year we talked a lot about 5G and telecoms. That's not really your business.
No, not at all.
Are you nervous?
I mean, I definitely have, think about it because I do see the, the NFV use case. I see those things definitely being where OpenStack is going to be strong at. But our requirements kind of almost force us into that type of use case. So for us, I definitely see large-scale SaaS benefiting from this platform. Okay. And so I see that's why we are still on this platform. We embrace it and really, feel like it's important for us to be involved in it as well. So, I see myself in this community, and I think, the great thing about it is there's it's still vibrant. There's a lot of really good activity in it. Is it perfect? No, but I love what's out there. I love how people are really trying to, make the platform more resilient. They're really thinking around the edges of okay, it's a new world. We're all kind of evolving on this cloud native journey, and the OpenStack community is trying to evolve with it. So yes, this is not the 3 years ago journey. We're in a whole new space now.
Right. What is that whole new space?
Well, I mean, for us, I mean, we're definitely looking at more of the cloud native frameworks. We want to embrace the, we want things designed to fail. We want to be able to introduce chaos. All these things that we're starting to see kind of evolve. We're working ourselves towards that direction. And so I think that's really, it's going to be a multi-cloud world. It's already in a sense we're multi-cloud because we have a data center and we have a public cloud provider. And I think that's really, for most people, it's a good strategy to have.
Sure. What about the rest of Adobe? As a company, we talked about Azure a little bit. Have other groups moved to OpenStack as well? You're with the Advertising Cloud, they've got other clouds, the Creative Cloud we know, but the Marketing Cloud and the Document Cloud, have they done anything in that area?
Yeah, I only stay focused on the Advertising Cloud, so
They don't let you talk about it, is that what it is?
I'm just saying, I speak for the Advertising Cloud.
Fair enough, fair enough. Have they learned lessons from you?
I'm sorry?
No, you're not gonna answer. I know you're not gonna answer. That's fine. Maybe in a few weeks.
Maybe in a few, or catch me outside with a cup of coffee.
Another time, yeah. Anything is there still anything that you need from OpenStack that's not in the core right now that you want the community to build for you?
I think for me, like the biggest things is just the, interoperability is important for me. So we're using things like Prometheus for like metrics, things like that.
Okay.
Like ease of integration, because like right now we kind of like take things very discreetly, and we use them as building blocks. And if there's any enhancements around like being able to include a lot of these emerging these tool chains like Envoy, Log, and things like that, those so I look for like the interoperability and like the ease of use. If those things start to appear to me, I'm happy. I'm not asking for a lot. Okay. So I just want these things to play nice. And I think a lot of us who had been on this journey, like one of the things that used to really chafe me was just the like API inconsistency and things like that. Whereas like we got to make these things not like we do it this way and you do it that way.
Right.
Because then it makes it harder for my team to be able to embrace and adopt these things.
Sure. You mentioned updates earlier on too. Have the changes to the release cycle with these kind of long-term releases now helped you?
I think I would love to say that we could keep moving forward continually, so I don't have to like be based off of like an extended release.
What are you using right now?
So we've been pulling from Puppet repos upstream, and so that kind of has it definitely when you get a release, and sometimes and we talk about health, when you'll see these great releases and like, oh, these great features are there, but then they're not in your your upstream. That's kind of tough. But as far as kind of like just the how we're consuming and what we're doing. I mean, I'm really just trying to keep ourselves moving forward. Like I don't want to have to use an extended maintenance release if I don't have to. But we've had to do some really like you can only scale so many times, and we used to use that as a strategy to build a data center up, put a new release on, migrate workloads. And then one of our recent upgrades, we basically like split our compute, and then we're just kind of like doing this slow roll basically to migrate. So I think for us, I mean, we're trying not to have to use an extended maintenance if we can help it. I'd like to keep us moving forward. And on the Kubernetes side, that's kind of really what we're doing. Like point releases come out, we immediately start rolling forward.
Talk about containers so much. Sometimes
this
becomes a container show. Get some time warning there. If you had to make the choice today, would you use OpenStack if you came in now?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think there's no other clear option. It gives us that elasticity. It worked really well for us to really automate. I mean, it allows us to scale our team. I mean, if we didn't have a lot of the tooling and framework around it to allow us to automate things where we could use a chat bot to be able to kind of like do repeatable things, it would be tough. But because it gives us that ability, and we can wrap around a CLI, talk directly to an API. It makes us get more done, and we can actually accomplish this, with a smaller team. So, sure. I would definitely. I don't see no other option in this type of space.
Got it. I'm going to open this up for audience questions in just a second here. Lou is already eager to ask.
He's going to give me a tough.
We're going to use the microphones here so that way the video recording has your questions as well. Well, he's getting ready there. The ecosystem has changed a little bit around OpenStack. Did you ever depend on vendors that disappeared on you, or did you ever worry about that?
I think I mentioned one earlier where they got acquired and they didn't exist, and we actually liked the relationship, and that was kind of tough. And then I also tried distribution at Lithium. And that one, I mean, there was some lessons learned there, because once we realized like it was using really the older paradigm of like installing a software. And then I realized, like, well, how do we inject our own personality into the cloud? Meaning, like, our SSH keys and all these other things. And we had our own automation. So we're like a lot of companies. You start off with one automation tool, and the next thing you know, you got 2 or 3, unfortunately.
Right. Got it. All right. Let's open it up for questions.
Yeah, it's really great to hear the your experience and your journey with this. And I was wondering, in terms of, can you give any more flavor around like how many OpenStack clouds are you running? Is this one big OpenStack cloud over this entire thing? And also then what are the automation tools that you're using to really manage it? Obviously, a lot of the tooling that is generally available in OpenStack is not meant to be at that scale. You're not going to use a Horizon dashboard to look at what's going on. So can you talk about some of the tooling and then again how you decided to break things up into multiple clouds if you did so?
Yeah, and I think as I mentioned earlier, being very pragmatic about it. So we run 6 data centers. We have 2 that it's kind of like in the U.S. East, Ashburn, Virginia. We have 2 in California, 1 in Europe, and one in Hong Kong. And so we didn't do real federation across them. We wanted to take that design to fail model so that if we lost one of our providers, and we have these sometimes events that happen where because we have an edge content provider, we can shift workloads over and then we can address like what's happening there. So it gives us that ability to be able to stay available, to make sure that our customers are not impacted. I mean, it's always tough when you lose like 50% of a zone, but at least we're able to kind of make sure like the most critical things are up and running and not impacting our service that we have. Going forward, like do we see ourselves like federating or doing some of these other things? I mean, I'm definitely looking at it, but I'm just trying to weigh out like what do we gain from that? But there is some complexity of management that of like how do you, because all of a sudden you got 6 different independent clouds and yet you're one person with like how many keys? It gets a little crazy. As far as like the tooling and stuff around it, we've used Puppet for a lot of our builds. We also have like I think the challenge that a lot of operators don't think about, but the last 2 jobs that I always found were the more challenging was, the data center primitives, like getting started, bootstrapping things and making sure things are up and running even before like you lay down your cloud. So we have a tool that we use internally that helps us to kind of be able to get that kickstart, that basic server up and get it prepped for deploy. And then we try to, like I said, keep it pretty simple and clean.
If you have only 4 people, that means you have to automate a lot.
You got to automate. Yeah, it's automation first. That is for sure. So we definitely have, we like I said, as I mentioned, we have this bot that we use, and he's a lot of repetitive tasks. He gets it done. But you definitely have to really think about all these things because it can get complex and add a tremendous amount of workload if you don't have that mindset first.
If you have this really nice tool to stand up your servers, would you open source that? Is it open source?
It's not open source, and that's a whole other question because I had a previous job where we actually had a tool that we did that was kind of like it was before there was ever like the terraforms and all these things. It was like, and we were trying to solve a problem that we saw, and I remember the day that Armand and Mitchell came into my office and they were like, "Hey, look at this tool," and we're like, "Wow, we're building the exact same tool," and it was tough because I had to let the guys know like, "Hey guys, I think we should just let this thing go and jump on board this and contribute to that project," and it was the right decision. And as far as like this tool, it serves a purpose, but I have to, I'm always constantly vetting, is there something in the community that actually meets that need? And maybe it's not 100% of what we require, but it's enough promise to be like, hey, we need to get with the community because you never want to just be out there on your own building, I've made the mistake in my career. I'm 25 years plus. I've had some homegrown things that I'm a little embarrassed about that I don't even want to talk about, that I should have. I wish there was an open source community tool available that I could embrace, but so I don't know if it's that type of tool where we don't open source or not. I mean, it may be one of those things where we evaluate and decide, hey, there's a community tool that's really solving that problem.
All right. Are there other questions in the audience? Don't be shy. Don't be shy. You have another one? You want to come up here?
How's your interaction with the application development teams, and particularly do they involve you when they're rolling out new releases of their app and your CI/CD pipeline, and what kinds of support do you offer them?
So I've in my career I've definitely really evolved. I mean, as a lot of us have over this like DevOps journey, and I love to because at the end of the day I'm really looking at like. I want to see my developers be productive. I want them to to not face impedance when they're trying to just deploy something. And we all have had that journey in our careers where you're kind of challenged with that. So I really stay close with my developers. Actually, one of as the one that we're doing work with right now for some of the newer containerized stuff. He actually moved and sits right next to me. And I mean, do I like them right next to me because I hear them all the time? No, but I hear firsthand like a lot of what's happening, and we're actually doing some really cool stuff as well. Like, you know, some of this is related to a lot of our machine learning, and so I'm getting like almost like this casual firsthand. I'm hearing all the things coming even before we get stated requirements. So I think it's critical that early on that you're really hearing and vetting and making sure that you're listening to your developers, and as well as like the experience that I had in my previous role where I just felt like, I could have done things slightly better, and I think it would have been a little bit better experience. And I'm trying to take those experience and just closely, guide. And I know they definitely have a developer-centric point of view, and we can sometimes, have spirited discussions about, well, I want to do it this way, or we should do it this way. But I'm trying to make sure that we stay close, and that here you're on a private cloud, you have a great opportunity to architect the platform specifically for those workloads. I mean, and that's one of the benefits that you should be doing. If you're not, you're really missing out on a big opportunity to impact the business.
So, number one, congratulations. It was a very nice talk. Number two, related to the very good question about application development, I'm curious how many of them are there? Is it tens? Is it hundreds? Because I'm curious also about the ratio. You have 4 sysadmins, including yourself. I'm curious how many they are.
Yeah.
And then I'm also curious about isolation. Do you do any sort of isolation between applications, something like multi-tenancy, or do you do anything at network level? And maybe also we can go into network complexity. That's something I'm curious about as well.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yes. So number, Nico, I don't know, maybe 100. Yeah, 150 devs. Yeah, and then I'm sorry. The part of the question you were asking about is the network piece of it. I'm sorry.
The other part is regarding isolation. There are 100 developers.
Oh yeah. And then Mikla, you want to?
This 100 developers as separate teams, and are there separate tenants?
Okay,
How do you do isolation between the applications? Does everything speaks with everything, or do you do anything at network level or at tenant level? This is what I'm curious about.
Sure. Well, first, and I want to just jump back to the dev question. So we have 150 developers. My team is core platform as well, but we actually work very closely with our SREs as well. So we try to make sure they have the tooling and visibility they need. As far as like the workloads that we have, we started primarily with a really specific workload, and then we got more of a big data workload as well. And so we keep like a very simple networking. We use VLAN, isolation to be able to separate some of those workloads. They can talk to each other if we allow it. But that allows us to be able to maintain the network performance that we need. Like we couldn't the multi-tenancy. We do have it in some smaller kind of like generic pools that we use that they are generally like supporting services around the core application. But that's kind of like the limit of it. We've been very fortunate to have, I wouldn't say slim requirements, but there's very discrete workloads, and I would say there's obviously the edge, big data, and then we obviously have this Java application that is really the core one that really drives a lot of the business, and then just a supporting services pool.
You mentioned machine learning. Is that a workload that's changing how you operate?
It definitely is, and that's a whole nother subject that I'm still even getting myself going on that side of the house as well. But that is like becoming a really core piece of our infrastructure as well.
Got it. Other questions?
I have one.
Please.
So on your container strategy, so how do you plan on introducing containers in the platform? Are you using Magnum or Kubernetes?
So not using Magnum, and I am actually gone back because I tracked Magnum early on when the project first emerged. We felt like, even previously when my previous job, a lot of the strategy was like we were trying to make sure that we were not compromising or making sure that we met like our compliance requirements and security. And so we felt the best way to do this was like having Kubernetes on top of OpenStack is what the best way for our team and our infrastructure. And we're doing the same thing currently right now. So we're just in the midst of like starting to roll out some initial containerized workloads, and these will, on this first iteration, will be just a Kubernetes install over using Terraform on top of like OpenStack. I think prove these out. We want like quick iteration. We want to get like quick results. We want to make sure that we're, like, hey, is this working? Is it meeting what the developers are expecting? And we'll revisit this, and depending on like how things evolve, we'll start looking at like things like Magnum to decide, okay, now that we're seeing like the momentum is there, we should really look at, maybe there's a native integration into OpenStack that makes our job really easy, or decide like maybe we stay, modular and separate.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What about OpenStack on top of containers?
Oh, the containerized control planes. Yeah, but that's the stuff that we want to R&D now. I definitely think it makes complete sense. I think that you get definitely where it was at like a couple years ago, as I mentioned, versus now, it definitely makes sense. You get a lot of that speed and benefit to be able to, and I think it's going to power a lot of like what's happening with upgrades and things going forward.
Got it. More questions?
Sorry, one more question. You mentioned the big data part and some bare metal, so HA proxy on bare metal. Do you put the big data part on the OpenStack, so the storage, or what's your solution for this?
I'm sorry, I missed the second half of your question.
Basically, where do you keep your data?
Yeah, the question is, you mentioned big data, and do you run the whole big data environment on your OpenStack, or is it a...
It's actually outside of our OpenStack. So we're running Aerospike in our data center, and we definitely had like an interesting journey. So we had storage in there, and I put storage like as a second-class citizen only because it's not a hard requirement for us. And you talk about like challenges and like things that we learned along the way. We definitely learned some lessons with Ceph, and Ceph has a lot of maturity, and now it's like this great project and it's really good. I think a lot of times in those early journeys, like when you don't move forward, you're still on some of these older versions, you definitely experience some pain. And I think there we did, and as well as like, how tightly integrated it was into our OpenStack as well, that, we did have some outages that were caused by Ceph. So we took a step back. We realized like, okay, let's rethink what we're doing with our storage and our requirements, and determine like the biggest key things that were just the most important were, our networking and our compute. And now we're actually, because of, things like Kubernetes needing to be there, and you need persistence, for XZD, we have to kind of go back and revisit. So we're actually going to reintroduce some of these things into our stack. And actually they'll move beyond being just kind of like that second class. If it's available, great. If it fails, no big deal, to where it's going to be more critical into our infrastructure. Maybe
just for explanation, why is storage a second-class citizen for you?
Well, for us, we're really focused on the actual application, the transaction it's producing, and so we don't have that really hard persistence that we need to maintain or state. I mean, we have state, but these things are not where we have to like recover a VM or recover like a data store. A lot of these things are kind of outside of it. So fortunately, like I said, my previous job, we definitely had storage was super critical, and it was very challenging because, a lot of the things that you get out of storage systems that you sometimes take for granted, it took time for Ceph to kind of like, evolve to where if I'm changing out disks, like the whole cluster is not impacted. And so now we're seeing like these things where we take for granted, and other, previous enterprisey things, you now are seeing in here that addresses that for operators. So, here, like I said, I think coming into next year, storage will become more of a first-class citizen for us.
All right. Questions?
So it's kind of a two-part question. So are you running stateless? And if you're running stateless, how it's working for you? And if you're not running stateless, how's your upgrades going, like from Juno, Liberty, Pike? Are you seeing any dips? Have you seen any issues with upgrades, or do you stop traffic to that region and then you upgrade?
Yeah. So you're saying, are we running stateless like
hypervisors?
So Weekly, you want to talk to it? Yeah. Yeah.
You might use the microphone if you do.
I'm not sure I understand the question on that, but basically, whenever we can, we try to leverage cluster solutions. So we do run like solution like HBase or Kafka on top of OpenStack. We just make sure to be smart how we distribute those nodes, so we don't have like everything on one hypervisor. But for us, it's like when we say like storage is a second-class citizen, it's like we really want to leverage those solutions that already distribute your data, but we do acknowledge that at one point, if we lose like all the data center, we lose the data. But there is not necessarily a need to have like a network storage for the solution because there is already a redundancy in the system.
And what about the upgrades? How are you doing the upgrades?
The upgrade of OpenStack.
Yeah, so we've definitely have gotten benefits from the, moving forward. Like I think I talked earlier about like getting from Icehouse to Mitaka. That was like, it was almost like because developers are coming back like, wow, look at the performance difference. Like we need more of that. So definitely trying to stay current is is our strategy now. Don't want to be unextended if we don't have to, but definitely benefits to.
But do you all see any dips in your traffic during the upgrade process? Do you all do an in-place or do you like?
No, we're not doing in-place. No, so we've been able to kind of blue-green. So we'll shift traffic.
We've got time for maybe 1-2 more questions. Yep.
I missed the first part of your session, so you may have answered this. And I'm curious to know, do you run currently on both public clouds and OpenStack? And if the answer is yes, do you abstract any of the differences in the deployment and provisioning steps to your application developers? And how is that handled?
So we do use some public cloud. I mean, we're primarily in the data center. We still have some AWS in like our US East, the US East area. We're using like Terraform as a provider. So I mean, I went down this path where like you're trying to like lowest common denominator to try to like equalize things, and I really believe in like tools like Terraform where you leverage really the public cloud resources as natively as possible. Definitely there's challenges when you get into some of the services and stuff because OpenStack, we're not trying to feature match in the data center, so that's the way we kind of normalize it. Nico?
On the developer experience, we do have the same experience for them on how they deploy the application. If they deploy on a public cloud or the private cloud that we have built with OpenStack, it's actually the same process and the same abstraction we have built. So for them, they don't necessarily know which environment they are running on. They will just know the location, and unless we tell them that's mean like it's an OpenStack environment, they don't necessarily know it's different.
And you do that through Terraform?
I mean, there is a mix of how we set up the infrastructure, and so we have like a bunch of DNS. We have all our Jenkins provisioning, so all the application is provisioned for the developers through Jenkins. For the infrastructure layer, we manage all that through Terraform. Yeah.
All right, last question. It's your last chance.
I was off the hook.
That's
This time is for the application. So I understand it's something in Java. Do you run on top of OpenStack something like Tomcats, or is it just plain Java, or how does that work? I'm curious because we have that.
We'll have to take this offline. We're
over time, I think.
Okay.
The music just started.
Okay.
That's the signal.
Thank you, Fredrik.
Thank you.